Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Andrew Least. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the manager of startup advisory and venture growth here at Tech Alliance. Acknowledging the stolen land upon which Tech Alliance sits is merely a starting point. It's imperative to honor the region's First Nations and all the original peoples of Turtle Island, recognize the trauma, genocide, and history of Indigenous peoples. This land is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, and the Attawandaron. To advance truth and reconciliation, our team is committed to continued learning, advocacy, and actively working alongside Indigenous-led businesses and entrepreneurs. Be informed, speak up, take action. Only then will reconciliation happen. As the Regional Innovation Centre for Southwestern Ontario, Tech Alliance empowers world-class ventures and fuels growth in Canada's innovation economy. We champion and coach entrepreneurs, amplify and impact businesses, and contribute to a bold technology community across the region. We are the place for dreamers, innovators, and world-changing ideas. In pursuit of creating spaces where innovation thrives, we must act, be bold, and lift others as we rise. And we strive to do that in all that we do. To put it simply, we support entrepreneurs and ventures at every step of the entrepreneurial journey. If you'd like to engage with our venture growth team, read stories about innovation that's shaping our community with world-changing ideas, or join other upcoming experiences, I invite you to subscribe to our newsletter using the link in the chat. Before we get the masterclass started, a few housekeeping points. All participants' microphones are muted, so please relax and enjoy. Today's masterclass will be recorded and available for replay on our YouTube channel. I encourage you to add any questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen and add any comments in our active chat feature. To get the conversation going, hop into the chat. What are you hoping to learn about exporting? This masterclass is taking a deep dive into export strategy, including legalities, taxation, shipping, and a multitude of logistics associated with expanding into global markets. Leading our learning today is the very knowledgeable and experienced Stephen Karpenko, Senior Advisor for the Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, Business Partnerships and Programs Division. With over 15 years of experience, Stephen works with small and medium-sized businesses to learn their operations and manage through challenging financial times. Stephen provides tactical advice and focuses on the key challenges for businesses and what Ontario government programs are being launched. So I'll now hand it over to Stephen's capable hands to walk you through your export journey.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and welcome everyone from Tech Alliance and elsewhere and to the masterclass today. Really happy to be here, and I'll share my knowledge, the stuff that I think really applies tailor-made to tech entrepreneurs and specifically tech exporters, and everything that you need to get started. And I will go into some specifics that I think you'll find helpful. So the first thing is, and the title of the masterclass, Your Exporting Journey. This map or graphic has all of the different elements. And as you can see, typically I see it as happening in 3 phases over 9 steps. There's a lot of detail there, and I'm not going to be able to go into all of it today, obviously, but I just wanted to share with you that kind of starts with your mindset and your approach and commitment to say, I'm ready to export, and then committing resources to that, personnel, your energy, time. It really requires a commitment. Then the next thing you're going to do is do that research, find out which markets, probably 1, maybe 2, are actually the most appealing and the best fit for you. A lot of sources out there online that can help you with that secondary or desktop research. Then getting more detailed in your market entry approach, how do you translate that into primary research where you're actually either going in market or you're communicating with people, buyers, it could be agents, distributors in that market who can give you the type of information you need firsthand to make your decision and to kind of recommit or continue that commitment. The next thing is a trade finance, which is how you're going to get out there in the market. It requires additional resources. Transportation and logistics, probably less of a concern for the audience, especially if you're into the service side of the economy or if you're into kind of smaller footprint type of stuff where you might be shipping more by air. But a lot of the freight that we do, obviously, as Ontario exporters, is by sea, in container freight, and and overland, of course, to the United States. Protecting your assets, avoiding cyber threats. being agile in the market that way, so being able to move and not be too concerned that your intellectual property will be stolen, etc. Dealing with agents and distributors, attending trade shows, getting results there, pay back on your time, then of course doing things through e-commerce. That's the lay of the land, and I'm gonna go into what I think are the highest priorities right now for a Tech Alliance audience. But if you want to dive deeper into each of those 9 steps, I have an upcoming webinar starting on March 2nd, happens over the course of 3 events. So Thursday, following Thursday, where we actually go into each of those steps in detail, have multiple guest speakers. You're more than welcome to join that. And I have the URL a little bit later on, but it's ontario.ca/trade calendar, one word. And you can see first steps in exporting. So I extend that invitation to you. Go on there, sign up, and you can join if you're experiencing more once we finish this masterclass. But the dive I want to give you today is a simple game plan for success in technology exporting. And this really is a roadmap towards the opportunity and things that I've been researching up until literally this week, last week, exposed to new opportunity. That I just finished a webinar last week called Exporting to Europe, where ICT in the France market was a big subject, and Europe in general, and I'll share some of that with you. When you think of a new exporter, even an experienced exporter, the reality is that almost 80% of Ontario's exports go to the United States. And there's a lot of reasons for that. They're our #1 trading partner, and for that matter, they sell us a lot of stuff too. So the two-way partnership between Ontario and the US is very strong. A big reason for that is just the proximity. Obviously, we have the longest undefended land border in the world, and it's easy to have that north-south trade lanes pretty well defined. So proximity, a land border, meaning you can ship stuff via truck. It's not all air and sea, which makes it real easy. Legal and accounting frameworks are not that different. They are different, of course, and there are definitely nuances to understand, and I wouldn't advise anyone just going cold without legal advice and some advice from your accountant. But the reality is that it's easy to understand and ask the right questions when you're dealing with a common language and so much history to go back on, case history in terms of legality and accounting rules and regs and that kind of thing. I just mentioned common language, although 40% of US citizens speak some level of Spanish. So that's good to know, especially if you're dealing down in the Southwest Coast or anywhere in the South, where Spanish is very prominent in terms of the spoken language. And of course, free trade. We have the CUSMA agreement, which approximately 98% of the goods and services trade between our country free of tariffs. And that's really great. And that, so those reasons, and they have more sophisticated capital markets in terms of fundraising for IT companies, as you know. That's another big advantage. And it's multi-location. It's not just West Coast, but certainly New York City and Boston have also very active venture capital networks. So therefore, a lot of trade is done with the US. And I would say that is one of your markets. That is probably the primary market. If you're looking to export, get outside of Canada in terms of selling. Of course, being in London, you're in a good central location in terms of Canada. So you have east-west trade opportunities as well between the provinces. And I would encourage you to take advantage of those because there are no borders unless you're in highly regulated sectors or industries like agriculture. When it comes to things like technology products and services, it's pretty much wide open. But once you're successful in Canada and you're ready to scale into the next market, the US to me is a pretty obvious choice. Beyond that, the next 10% of our exporting dollars revenue comes from exporting to the EU, the European Union, which is a free trade zone of 27 countries, and the UK. It was part of the EU, but now has separated through Brexit. We have a standing agreement with them right now where the same terms and conditions apply as we have with the EU in terms of free trade. And we're working on so that's transitional, but we're working on a more permanent agreement with the UK. And I think the expectations is that the trading arrangements will be more or less the same. Again, like CUSMA, about 98% of the products cross border, cross into the EU tariff-free, which is also a very nice arrangement. So free trade being a real advantage. In the UK, common language, English is the language which is spoken there. In the other 27 countries of the EU, English is, I would generalize by saying, is not the primary language, but certainly it's in the top three and very common in European countries where mastery or exposure to three languages is very common. So the local language of the country, maybe French as a second country language, very common across Europe, and then the third would be English. And so a lot of common language, even in countries like Germany, which have a very proud long heritage in terms of language and culture, very open to dealing in English with companies from Canada. One of the big advantages of the EU, even though there are 27 countries, is the freedom of movement of labor and capital. So just like in the US, once you're in there, when you get into the EU and you've gotten your visa, you basically have the ability to do business amongst those 27 countries freely. And that's a real advantage because combined, the size of the European market, the EU, is about the size of the US, if not slightly larger. So there you have two really big markets, 350 to 400 million people. So combined, almost a billion that you can deal with essentially as two entities. And once you've dealt with the barriers, however small they may be, once you've dealt with them, you're free to operate. That's pretty amazing. UK is very much a separate country right now, post-Brexit. Just because you get your visa to operate in the UK does not mean that you have automatic passage into the EU and vice versa. That's kind of one of the unfortunate fallouts, and makes it a little bit more complex, but nonetheless, EU does represent 27 countries. So now I'm going to dive in a little bit deeper, and I really want you to know about things like immigration and taxation, because it's very easy for me to generally say that the US is a great market based on some of the factors that I outlined. Very easy to say that the EU is a great market, and we are, but it's also important to know how to do business in these countries. And let's look at things like immigration. The US, and what families haven't had a vacation in the US or plan one or have that kind of on the bucket list. But nonetheless, it's easy in one way in the sense that the US has what's called a business visitor status. And that basically means you can go into the US with your Canadian passport. If you don't have a Canadian passport, that's another layer of complexity, which I won't get into, but certainly for Canadian passport holders, you can enter the US under business visitor status without having to apply for a separate visa or provide any more rationale beyond a few of the business reasons why you're going there. And you need to explain that to a border and service, the border services guards at the US border, because they have ultimate power. They don't have to defer to anybody. If you make a case or they're questioning your ability to enter the country, there is no sort of second source that you can go to. They will either allow you in or disallow you, and you'll probably know the reason if you're not allowed in. But they do have the power to make that decision, and it does vary from border to border. And so if you're kind of doing significant business, or you're planning to, or make somewhat frequent trips, that going at a more popular border, or like the Peace River Bridge into Buffalo, they're used to Canadian visitors, they're used to Canadian business people going over to the US there. Whereas a smaller border, as let's say as you head east along the 401 corridor between here and Montreal, it would be less so. That's not to say they're used to a lot of freight, but for people going into the US for business purposes, it does maybe raise a bit of a flag in the sense that they're wondering why you would leave Toronto, or why you would travel further east of Toronto from London in order to cross over at Kingston or Belleville or something like that. So anyway, you're entering in as a business visitor status. Beyond that, if you the limits of business visitor is it's a judgment call, and they're looking at a frequency of trips that you're making over there. Maybe different personnel from the same country. If it starts to look too much like you're really implanting yourself into the market there, they're going to flag that, and your business visitor qualification based purely on your passport will decline quickly, and you're not necessarily going to get a warning. You almost have to have a bit of a sense for you've crossed the line, or maybe you want to consult with somebody who does immigration, and you do have access to those people, and just let them know what you're doing or what you're planning, and frequency and that kind of thing, and the type of business you'll be doing. And they can let you know if maybe you need to go for a work visa. And I've outlined a few of them on the screen there, the L1, the E2, E1. They're not that expensive to get, and they're fairly easy to get. They basically require you to visit with somebody at the border, at the border crossing in an office, and they'll basically want to maybe see your credentials, something about your incorporation, perhaps, to prove the validity of your company in order to issue the visa. But once you've got that visa, typically they last for up to 3 years. They allow for fairly free movement, and that could be a big deal for you. But I'll get into a little bit of specifics about what constitutes free movement. But you do have to be careful, as I've said. The EU requires a visa. There's no doubt. It's a more stringent entry requirement. They don't have the equivalent of business visitor status. But like I said earlier, once you've got it, you have 27 countries with which to operate. Nobody's going to chase you down if you move from France to Germany or Germany to Luxembourg, that kind of thing. You're free to move out. That's the immigration part of it. So I think that as a beginner entrepreneur, you're starting to do, or beginner exporter, you're starting to do business in the US, that we typically make assumptions about, oh, we're not doing too much and they'll let us in, but make sure you check, consider what I've said in terms of what you're planning to do. And I have 1 or 2 more slides on that. In terms of taxation, the taxes in the US are fairly lenient, especially if you're doing services type business, especially if you're doing business from Canada online into the US. You're not really required to pay taxes, but there is a federal tax form. It's called the 1040 NR. And you can ask your accountant about it, but really, if you're going to be doing frequent business in the US, even if it's online, you never know when online can pivot to suddenly you need to go visit and do something in person. That what a 1040 NR, even though you may owe no taxes according to the rules, it at least alerts the US at the federal level, the IRS, that you exist and that you are aware of their requirements, if you will. And it's kind of a form of just basically saying, hey, I'm here, we're operating within the rules, but should that change, we don't want it to come as a surprise. And what you don't want to do is have it sort of appear on their radar, and then they have to track you down. Then you have a bit more of a problem. So there is kind of this option to file the 1040 NR, not pay tax, and basically say, hey, we're here and we're doing business in the US, and we're doing business with the US clients, and just wanted you to know. And that's a best practice. With the EU, definitely you must be registered and you must collect VAT or, I don't even know what that stands for, value added tax. I think it's been around for so long. But the VAT is their flat taxation system. And even though you're doing business online with European entities, you need to collect VAT even from end customers. If you're selling business to consumer, you need to collect that. And then there's a mechanism for you to figure out if you have to remit that tax and how you remit it. It's part of the mechanism that's built in. So it's kind of a difference there. At the state level, and the 50 states in the US, they also have taxation requirements, but they're typically based on what's called a nexus. And what a nexus is a physical presence in the US, not a third-party warehouse, if you follow me. So Amazon is a third-party warehouse. That does not constitute you having a physical presence, nor does using a pick and pack warehouse in Buffalo in order to make it easier to ship product to your customers. That also wouldn't be considered. But if you were to have your own warehouse or sales office, albeit small, that constitutes a presence in that state, and you probably have to pay state taxes. If, however, you're doing services online, the thresholds for you having to pay state taxes are very high, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars really, before you have to do that and remit taxes. So those are just a few points to keep in mind and to review with your accountant as you start to scale up into the US market. And this I'm not going to go over in detail, but suffice to say that business visitor permissible activities, which is to say going in on your passport, are pretty much, if you're doing a transaction where you're selling to a US client or you're procuring something from an American company, in other words, they're selling to you, you're paying them, those are typically allowed, as is R&D, any kind of recon that you want to do in the market, as long as you're not getting paid for it, that you're allowed to do that. And if you are getting paid for it, then that becomes may have possible tax consequences. And based on some of the guidelines I've given you before, that you want to check with your accountant. And if you're looking for any kind of advice in terms of immigration and tax, let me know and you have access to those people. What is always recommended when you go over, even though you're compliant with your business visitor regulations, is you carry documentation with you, and you'll have access to these slides. So I'm not going to go over this in detail, but there's certain things that if you carry them with you, you just make the border guard's job so much easier. And like I said, they're an individual, they have authority, and they're all different. They have, of course, similar training and backgrounds, but that doesn't mean they're going to kind of make the same call. And by you having documentation about who you are, why you're going, a request from a client for you to come down, a preparation for a sales meeting, your hotel bookings, your return flights, etc. These are all important pieces of documentation that help the border people make the right decision on your behalf. So that's kind of it in terms of immigration taxation, but went into a little bit of detail there, but I think it's really important that because your first markets will be the US typically, or the EU, especially in terms of physical going and visiting the country, that you really do need to know about that kind of stuff. There's also support outside of, so Tech Alliance being your incubator and accelerator, you're getting tons of advice. I know that, and really good advice from great speakers and master classes. But there are resources outside of that, and if you're not aware of it, from Ontario, and this would be my branch of the government, the Export Growth Branch within the International Representation Division, we do 70+ trade missions per year, multiple webinars on different topics, and there's the URL. So make sure you visit our trade calendar and just see what's going on. You can register for online events there. A second major source is the Federal Trade Commissioner Service, and they have representatives in over 160 countries around the world. And we connect with them. We have 16 offices in our department, and basically that covers. We have 3 in the U.S. We have a number in Germany and the Far East, and we can really help you hands-on that way. But beyond that, we also have the Flow Network and co-location networks with the Trade Commissioner Service, and they expand to literally cover the globe. I'm sure you've heard of the Export Development Corporation. If not, they're the ones who can provide receivables insurance. So if you're doing consulting there, if you're shipping high-value freight, you want to make sure that you get paid. And they're the advisory arm, and they also can help with your cash flow and working capital by basically ensuring what you're sending over and creating cash flow scenarios where they're kind of paying you in advance prior to the supplier meeting the terms of trade. So, or sorry, your customer. So if your customer has a 60-day terms on a contract that you've got with them, they don't have to pay you for 2 months. With that, using the EDC, you can get paid maybe in 30 days or less, which really helps with your cash flow, especially if you have to produce something in order to fulfill that order. So it allows you some flexibility and fluidity in terms of doing business with customers, and maybe a chance to scale up into higher volumes using EDC's cash instead of your own. And they also have performance contracts. Typically, if you sign a services contract, let's say you're in infrastructure development, architecture, an IT build out, data center, you're providing a lot of training, that kind of thing, that a client, they're going to pay you, and you're going to have terms. It might be 30% upfront, 30% midpoint, and then the balance on completion. That, you know, what if you're worried about getting paid? You can certainly insure against that, but the client in those scenarios is also worried about you being able to provide the service, and they actually at the midpoint, they've now given you 60% of the value of the contract. Maybe you've only delivered 30% of what's been agreed upon at that point. Not only do they want to make sure they get their money's worth for what they've already paid for, but they want to make sure that you can follow through and commit to the end of the contract, that the EDC can put up that performance bond on your behalf, and that really helps. Then there's government procurement, which you may or may not have been exposed to. So GBOF stands for Global Bid Opportunity Finder, and that's a Canadian system where they list all of the government procurement around the world, and that includes defense contractors, all kinds of stuff. And governments buy everything. They don't just buy weapons and the things you read about in the newspapers, but they buy office chairs and desks and PCs and software and all kinds of software licenses, that you have access to those bids as well. And you can use a system like GBOF to find them. So just Google that. And TED is a similar system for European contracts. So between those two, you pretty much have the government procurement side locked up. So just to shift gears a little bit here, really encourage you to attend local events. These are two that are happening in Toronto. You probably have your own versions of these happening in London and into the West, into Windsor, Detroit area, that kind of thing. But in Toronto, we have two pretty big events. I mean, Collision is a major global one. And this will be the last year that it's going to be held in Toronto. I believe next year it's shifting venues after being here for a few years, even through the pandemic. But it's an amazing, it's a free-for-all in the sense that I think there are 30,000 people that attend over the 4 days. It's a place where you just go in where you're there to network and you're there to meet as many people as you can, and you never know where a single contact can go. Some years are better than others in terms of attracting the VC community from the US. VC, as you know, and fundraising is more of a challenge now than it's been in the last 4 or 5 years. But certainly they're still out there. And when it comes to SaaS and AI, that kind of thing, there's very much demand for that. And so Collision is a great place to reestablish those contacts, and with the borders reopening up, it's going to be much better this year even than it was last year. So I encourage you to attend that one. And then we have another one, Big Data and AI, which happens in Toronto as well. There are the dates, and not quite as big and more of an industry insider show in the sense that you don't have the same level of awareness and enthusiasm outside of practitioners like other engineers and that kind of thing. But you do get to network, and a little bit more networking in terms of people who are in the industry with you. If you're looking for venture partners or somebody who can provide a key piece of IP that will help with your solution, that Big Data and AI is a good place to do that. In terms of other selected IT events, these are ones that are in the US that we're involved with, but they pretty much represents the big shows in terms of your general IT. So I mentioned SaaS and AI already, but when you look at energy technology, life sciences, new medical devices, different things that are happening in there, consumer electronics and fintech, that pretty much covers a big chunk of the IT world. And these shows here, this list of 7 shows, pretty much are the leading ones. And you can go onto our trade calendar. If you feel that's something you really want to attend, you can send me an email and we can look at it, because we're actually involved in these shows, and we take a delegation down. There's a fee, but we heavily subsidize participation. If you think you're ready and we think you're ready, we'd be happy to have you on. And these, again, are great ways. We have business-to-business meetings and different parts of the showcase. It's not just a trade show. There's all the behind-the-scenes stuff that happens. And it's a really intensive opportunity for you to make inroads into the US market. And similar with Europe. And these are events that are happening in Europe. And you can see that, again, it pretty much covers the IT spectrum. We've got gaming, virtual reality, augmented reality, extended reality is part of that. So you have different subsets. You have different smart cities things, infrastructure related technology, a lot of clean tech. And anyway, you can read the list when you see it. And if there's anything in here that catches your eye, again, same offer that we can try and get you to participate or get you involved with us. Another thing I'd encourage you to investigate are the Canadian technology accelerators that we have around the world. So these are a part of the federal government's initiative. I think it's involved with the National Research Council and IRAP. But these are basically hubs where, not unlike a Tech Alliance, elsewhere in the world, where you have access to mentorship, you have access to networking, to financing opportunities. So if you haven't heard of the Canadian Technology Accelerators, there's the website to check them out. They are focused on what we call strategic technologies, like the digital industries and all its subsets, clean tech, life sciences, of course, part of that. It rolls into smart cities. So again, spaces, as always, are limited, but at the same time, these are Canadian technology accelerators. And I'll just share with you an anecdote. One of my colleagues, a number of years ago, He was the trade commissioner down in New York City and invited 20 tech companies from the greater GTA and Hamilton and London to come down with him. And there really wasn't a lot of interest. And he was surprised by that, even though these in Canada, say in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, getting a lot of interest and getting some interest in terms of funding. When they went down into the bigger market, the greater market of the New York City finance community, there's a little bit of that, we don't know you because you're not from here type of mentality, and nothing wrong with that. And I think it's expected. But the Canadian technology accelerators are a bit of a solution to that, in the sense that you are kind of coming from that incubation environment. So maybe inquire internally at Tech Alliance what that is, what the CTAs are, and whether you would qualify for that, etc. And if you've already heard about it and covered it then great. But it's another piece of the puzzle in terms of this US and EU market entry piece. And you probably have heard of, if you're setting up a company there through a joint venture or whatever, that the Delaware C Corp is the preferred method of getting organizing the company down there for a whole bunch of reasons. But it mainly comes from the investment community because it's so easy in terms of transference of shares and reorganizing capital that you're not having to actually get involved in a heavily paperwork legal trail in order to bring in a new investor or to set aside an option pool. That basically the Delaware C Corp has part of that in its DNA, or has that in its DNA, and just makes it easier to do so. So switching gears again, now let's go to the EU in terms of their market entry and their ecosystem, and what's the best way to get organized there. Luxembourg is a fantastic market, and I kind of call it the gateway to the EU. France has a lot going on. Germany, of course, has a lot going on. Like I said at the beginning, UK is a little bit of a separate thing, and IT isn't their number one play anyway. But when you look at Luxembourg, and we have connections in that market, so again, I make the offer that if you think you're ready and you're looking to get into Luxembourg or get into the EU, remember it's 27 countries via Luxembourg, that's a great play. And not to confuse you with all the dots representing logos here, but more importantly are the different categories of IT that Luxembourg is really into, and it covers pretty much everything. They have a pretty large ecosystem. They're really into promoting it. They're really into attracting new companies. And if it's not a good fit with Luxembourg, I'm sure that we can connect the dots and find the EU country that is. But the beauty of Luxembourg is they're really promoting themselves as an entry point into the EU. And as I mentioned earlier, once you're in, you're in. And so your game plan can be start with Luxembourg, maybe be a bigger fish in a smaller pond, nothing wrong with that. And you can grow from there and expand from there and plan your strategy from there. Now, as much as they encourage you to establish a location there, we call that a direct investment or foreign direct investment into Luxembourg, that there's also a way to get in there. You may have heard of e-residency via Estonia, and they're the only country that does this. And they basically allow you at, I would say the cost of about €1,000, which is around $1,500 Canadian, you can literally establish an EU company without having to be there. And this is all digital. This is all online, interactive existence for the company. There is no physical establishment of a presence in Estonia. But what they're doing is they're basically offering for that $1,500 that you can do any business you want in Europe via your Estonia-based virtual company. And that's important because for any of you software providers out there or transaction providers, payments, etc., and when you're scaling, the dollars can add up in a hurry, and you really want to know what your tax advantages are. And the beauty of Estonia is that for capital that's reinvested back into the company, and when you're in that startup phase, it's pretty typical. You're not providing a lot of dividends and taking money out and that kind of thing. Of course, your salaries are within the operating budget of the company, but profits that are reinvested are not taxed, and that's a big opportunity for a startup company, especially in tech. Of course, if you have profits that are declared as dividends to investors or to founding shareholders, yeah, you pay tax on that. The corporate tax rate is 20%, which is pretty low, one of the lowest in Europe. I think the lowest is 14%, but it certainly goes north of 20. And so establishing e-residency in Estonia is a way to get established. Now I'm going to pick up the pace a bit because I look at time. I just want to give you 7 actions that guarantee success for a global company that wants to turn their opportunities into customers. The first thing is to be obsessed about sales, be obsessed about results. Any company that as it matures, I mean, you may be 80% engineering and technology right now. At some point, you have to make the shift from being 80-20 product focused to being 80-20 marketing and sales focused. And that is the most critical thing. So important for entrepreneurs. And as a CEO and a founder, it's a bit of a trick for you to do that because the way you can handle it right up front, right from the beginning, is to really think of yourself as a sales-oriented culture. Yes, you have great products. Yes, you have great engineering, product design, etc. But if no one's out there buying it and you're not able to sell it, then it really falls apart from there. So it starts with philosophy. Grant Cardone, be obsessed or be average. I love that. Jeffrey Gitomer, learners are earners. In other words, in part of culture inside your company of continuous learning, personal development, getting better. Jim Rohn, if you want things to change, you've got to change. Zig Ziglar, you can have everything you want if you help others get what they want. These are all philosophical things, but they form the basis for your mission. And where you're creating something that says, I'll reward you for learning. We reward employees for going out and getting certifications and continuing a professional education. Those are things that you can build on. And what is your why? Why do you exist? Why does your company exist? What's bigger than your customers and your product and services? And that's kind of the mission. And being mission driven really carries a lot in terms of creating a culture of performance and a culture of success because you're driving towards those goals. Does everyone have goals? 1 year, 5 year, 10 years? How do those roll up in terms of the organization goals? Does everyone is there a strong belief system? Are you helping people who work with you to believe in themselves, to believe in the products and services, to believe in the company? These are part of the foundation of a strong, obsessed sales culture. Then, of course, you need to have process. You need to be systematized around selling, and because it's expensive to get customers. And at first, they may come really easy, but as you talk about scaling and getting bigger, you really need to systematize what you're doing behind that sales process. And I'll go into that in a minute. And just in terms of customer engagement, making sure that you're very clear in terms of what are like the 5 things that you want to know about every one of your customers. It could be something that you kind of put on file and you start to profile what our best customer is, or it could be just things that are really successful in terms of the sales process. And there's a kind of a thing that says great salespeople ask great questions. Well, are you training your salespeople with 5 great questions that will help to define your company as being different in the marketplace? And as an exporter, so as an exporter, it's one thing to kind of be successful in the local market. It's quite another to scale up globally, where you really do need to have that culture. You need to make that shift to 80-20 sales and marketing, 20% product engineering. The next thing is to be really clear on your story. And we talk about this when we're pitching to buyers, international buyers, that you're dealing with maybe multilingual, you're maybe dealing with the translation space, that it starts with features and tangible benefits. But the reality is what we're selling to a customer, we're not selling features, we're selling futures. And by understanding how this pyramid works, you can get to defining and being able to kind of make it clear what the future looks like for your customer, and then be able to repeat that across customers and start to scale up. Because when you look at the bottom there, a sale, it's an emotion with a product attached to it. So what are those emotions? Are you pushing those emotional buttons in order to really engage the customer? So going beyond the speed, the horsepower of the engine and how fast it is and acceleration, how does it make them feel? Well, you want to be able to emphasize those emotional benefits. The feeling of power, the feeling of speed is the thing that makes it different. It's not just going fast, it feels fast, it sounds fast. And really getting the customer's imagination going, and then being able to go further up the pyramid and have a key metric or something that really seals the deal, which what I call monetizing the benefit. If you're saving them time, how much time? Can you tell them how many dollars they save? You've got those 5 engaging questions. Which 2 of those questions allow you to very quickly, literally in your mind on the fly, determine what the monetary value is to a customer using your product or service. And typically in technology, that's what we're selling, right? We're selling efficiency, we're selling productivity, we're selling maybe a better failure rate. In other words, the product lasts longer before it has to be replaced. How do you translate what the customer is telling you very quickly and monetize that benefit? Now you're circling in on the close. You've got their emotions. You're able to quantify it for them, and then you cap it off with basically, and here's what other customers are saying. Boom, you got them, and that translates so well into international market and international selling. But persistence pays off. It's such a thing that we don't study. We're not really aware of it. We hear, oh, it costs 7 times more to get the new customer than it does to service the existing one, and that's true. And this little chart here is a big part of it, and that is that only 13% of salespeople go over 4 calls in terms of engaging with a single customer. They'll only reach out to them 4 times. Whereas the bottom chart is saying that most sales happen after the 4th contact. So only 13% are doing more than 4 contacts, 4 or more, and 90% require 4 or more contacts. That means that 13% of the salespeople are chasing 90% of the opportunity. So when you're obsessed, you go beyond 4 calls, you go to 6 calls, you go to 8 calls, because you'll get the deal. If you have salespeople who are just cycling through, going 2, 3, 4, boom, okay, I didn't get that one, next one, 2, 3, boom, didn't get that one, next one, 4. Your sales will only be by more or less by luck, but B, you're starting to add on to the cost of what it takes to get a new customer. In other words, let's say the one at the bottom, they make those 10 calls, they get 1 customer. At the top, you're cycling through, it might be 40 calls before you get that 1 customer. So boom, right there, just in terms of cost of sales, head count, it's 4 times. So right there, I've just proven that it's 4 times more expensive to get a new customer than it is to kind of keep a customer and nurture. You need to get organized to sell globally. And what I mean by that is that if your company right now is organized around kind of a central locus of decision making, it's you as a founder, it's you as a primary investor, maybe your cash flow is a big consideration. Obviously, it is for any startup, anyone who's growing first few years in business. But at some point, especially when it comes to going international, and this is why I really emphasize your domestic experience. Maybe you go from your local market to an Ontario market to a Canada market. Maybe you're dabbling in the US a little bit, but what you're really doing is you're honing all of these organizational skills that you need. And the chart on the right is where you've kind of matured into what I call a systems-based business or system-driven, where you're using reporting, you're using information, you're using regular meetings, you're using responsibility and accountability within the organization. And it's not just an org chart. An org chart is just a picture. It's not just titles. Titles are meaningless. Leadership is important. When you assign and expect leadership from somebody else in the organization, you have the accountability there and the ability to measure, because the last thing you want to do is accuse somebody of poor performance when you haven't done anything in terms of measurement or being proactive in terms of those yellow flags that might allow you to take corrective action, that you wait till things fall apart. That's what being organized really means. And what I like to say is what you want to do, your top priorities are get in control of the things that are out of control. And those are the boxes you create on the org chart first. So you kind of become a control freak about the things that you need to get organized before you start going international. Because once things really start to move fast and you start to scale, that you won't have a chance to do the same kind of good work in this area. And you've heard that investors, when they're interviewing you and getting to know you, hearing your pitch, they're interested in team and management. Well, this is kind of what it is. They want to know if you can pull it off. They want to know if you've made that transition to a sales-obsessed culture. They want to know if you have proper means of motivating and you have proper accountability. Not that you just have an org chart and names and titles, but you're actually able to demonstrate your ability to scale and not have the wheels fall off in the process. And we're all allowed to make mistakes, don't get me wrong, but there are kind of the small M mistakes and then there are big M ones, and you want to make sure that you're working on those big M ones through control through systems and through proper management. Oftentimes, we can get into new markets by direct selling. And what that means is you don't have to establish a sales office in another country in order to sell there. You can, and I'm not talking about business to consumer, Amazon type of marketplace sales, although those are there as well. I'm talking about business to business selling. You can do it very effectively from here. But the key is to know what your sales funnel looks like and what your conversion metrics look like in order that you can start with one person, but then add on to them and have an expectation and a sales forecast and a cash flow forecast. And out of that cash flow forecast comes the fundraising capability that you can be proactive and see in advance and have that 1 year kind of outlook in order that when you go into these other markets where maybe going to the US suddenly an order is 10 times as big as you thought, that you have the cash flow and you have the ability to follow through and execute on those sales. And a part of that is knowing what these conversions are between different stages of the funnel. So you think of awareness and then consideration and then action or sale, but these are different steps and there's a narrowing that goes on as you go down. Not 100% of people who are exposed to your message are going to buy, only a fraction is. In this case on the left, it's 1%. So that means you need to be generating 100 leads in order to get that one sale. How many sales can a single sales rep do? How many proposals do they have to write? And it's sort of a misnomer in today's digital culture that we think that selling doesn't require proposals, doesn't require a human intervention, that everything's online. And I think that's kind of where we blurred a little bit. We start thinking in terms of like Amazon and people going on, they read a review and they just do a sale. That's probably not the markets that you're in. At some point, even though you're doing a lot of your awareness side of it on the right-hand side on your digital funnel, that at some point it crosses over and you're going to create a proposal, or when you close a deal on a services type arrangement, a software installation, a purchase, there's a contract involved. So at some point it crosses over, and therefore you really need to have a handle on these metrics and how, and you kind of work backwards in terms of first, once you know how many leads you have, does it convert into one sale, how much effort and time is required, you can then kind of re-engineer that funnel and you can say, okay, what's my cost per sale and how many people do I need to get X number of sales? And you create a spreadsheet, and I certainly do this using simple spreadsheets. You can find out, based on your cost per lead, what your actual marketing and sales costs are. And that's super important to be able to re-engineer those funnels. And then I hope you're hanging in there. This is tuning up the operating system of the business. And this comes back to that cost of acquiring a customer versus servicing an original one. We know it costs 6 to 7 times more up at step one, up at the lead generation step, because you have a cost per lead. Maybe you're advertising online. And let's face it, as much as YouTube views and likes on Facebook and Instagram, they have a cachet to them. And I think that cachet this comes from Grant Cardone, Be Obsessed or Be Average. He uses social media to dominate his brand space. In other words, every time a competitor turns around, they see his company at the top of the search engine result. They see his company with all of the social media mentions. When there's a hashtag, it's Grant Cardone's company. He strategically uses social media to cast put a blanket basically over the brand awareness. And what happens is it doesn't necessarily translate into more sales. And I think there's a very loose correlation between social media activity and actual sales, because I believe very strongly, and research certainly shows that it's the quality of the sales engagement and the amount of attention and not quitting after 4 calls and all of that, which is very much the driver of your sales success. But when you think of the social media part, what he uses it for is he wants his competitors to see that he dominates the brand space. And that's where branding and social media can work for you too, is don't count on it for sales and revenue generation. But you could certainly strategically leverage it to promote yourself as being the #1 leader in the category. Category leadership is so important when it comes to when you're starting to make those connections with customers with a real person that they recognize, and they're going to go online. They're going to do the research in terms of your brand, that you're always there, and they say, okay, boom, you get a big check mark there. Let's talk. That's in step one. And now when you get into step two, step three, people think, oh, we need to be really good at client service. Well, client service or customer service, that's a noun, that's a thing. What you want to really be good at is servicing the customer. And what that means is when you have a customer, make sure they're the greatest customer, that make sure there's a fit with you, but make sure that you give them what they need, that you're able to give them that, what they require. And when you look at different markets, obviously there are big cultural differences. When you go to, say, South Korea, it's a big difference between that and doing business in Brazil. Not only different spoken languages and cultural and historical, that kind of thing, but just in terms of like nightlife, in terms of how you have to sort of change your body clock and your body calendar in order to connect with them and build those relationships in person. That's part of servicing the customer and being close to them. Why? Because that gets you into the repeat and referral cycle. So if you're able to extend your product line, add value by providing things like customer support, 24/7 access, product line extensions, interfaces and integration with other platforms that are happening in your subsector, that you're part of that ecosystem, and of course you have to be, but for a specific customer, getting them to pay for it because they value that, and they pay for value, that's a repeat. And then of course referral is when you're sort of recognized as being a leader in a local geography, in a local market, or in a local geography industry intersection, that if you're getting to be known not just for your brand presence or the fact that you've got one customer, but you've got one customer who really values what you're doing for them and is happy to refer you to even their competitors because you're so amazing. Because there's an expression, the rising tide lifts all boats, and that goes for service and customers. And when you're a Canadian company operating in a foreign market, it carries even more value, more cachet than it does here in Canada, because they see that you're going the extra mile, and just the fact that you're there is part of that extra mile equation. And that all comes back to it costs 6 to 8 times as much to get a new customer up in stage one than it does to leverage repeat business, line extensions, new revenue sources with existing customers, and the ability for them to refer you within a foreign market, which, as we established right at the outset, is hard to get a footprint on. And so if you're able to do that, your profitability goes way up, your ability to scale goes way up, and now you're starting to prioritize those markets, coming back to the exporting journey. So I talked a lot about direct sales. There are other ways to get into markets. Agents and distributors are very important. If you have let's say it's a SaaS-based product or something that's going to be operating in a local servo farm. If you're operating in the EU, for example, there's a GDPR regulation, which is to say that private and sensitive data can't leave the country or the market, that you have to make sure that you have a service establishment there. Maybe you're going to do that through agents within the market. If you're doing installations, if you're doing on-site training, maybe you don't want to go have the expense or the risk of doing that in market. You're going to use agents or distributors who can connect you either as an intermediary or to be able to provide the service themselves directly within the market. Further up the scale, you may get into a joint venture in South Korea, in Germany. They certainly value joint venture partnerships. The biggest thing is a wholly owned entity where you're taking on all of the legal risk and market risk. You don't have anybody sort of co-representing you there. But we're talking about getting out and becoming an early stage exporter. We're certainly talking about direct selling, which I talked about at length, where you're operating from an office based here in Canada. The secondary source is through agents or distributors within the market. You're actually in the market and become your face. Now, a lot of that stuff that I talked about in terms of the operating system of your business and being successful in terms of servicing the customer and your brand presence, all of that is required for agents or distributors to be successful. They're not out there. They don't have the skill or the wherewithal to represent, because you're not exclusive with them. It's very rare that you have an exclusive arrangement with an agent, and especially with somebody who's distributing on any kind of scale. They're operating and they have on behalf of the country, within the country, and they have a lot of different companies and solutions they're dealing with. They require you to cast that image and that presence out there. And so that operating system of the business in foreign markets, when you're operating at arm's length or even closer through agents and distributors is even more important than it is here locally. So just to summarize, on the left side, the sales reps, that's your direct selling. That's the activity that you're doing in the early stages from probably here in Canada in your local office, or maybe you're making day trips down to the US operating within that business visitor status. Those are your sales representatives. That's you. That's the people who are working for your company. They might be part of your option plan as well as collecting salary. When you look at agents, as I just said, they're kind of one step removed, but you do have a contractual arrangement with them. They don't carry inventory typically, but they're very much going to carry your business card. You do have to keep in touch with them. Agents do require management. So you think about managing the sales force. That with an agent, so that's you're going to the trade shows, you're making that trip probably quarterly. You're going to meet with your agents, you're going to meet with your distributors, and you're trying to build on your relationship. Obviously, do kind of sales reviews and that sort of thing. But you also have your radar on to make sure, like, what is this agent? How are they representing us? So you're reviewing not only their results, but you're also reviewing their methodology and looking for ways to improve. And same with the distributors. There's something you could be doing better, more effectively, that would make the distributor's job easier. And this all adds up to your ability to scale in these foreign markets. So you're selling through an agent. Like I said, they don't carry inventory. Typically, a distributor, if you're in a product part of the market, that they are buying an inventory from you. Don't get me wrong, if it doesn't sell because you're not doing your job, it's all going to come back through returns. But nonetheless, they are cutting purchase orders. And like I said before, the EDC export development can help with the insurance and cash flow related to that. But agents are not in that position. They're very much an extension of your sales team. Then, of course, as you mature, you can establish that sales office. Maybe you have one person. The first hire might be somebody to go over into the German or France market and conduct business there as an employee of the company. That's your call. I'll send you this stuff. This is just a checklist for success at trade shows, which are in-market events, which we do a lot of. Like I said at the outset, let me know if you think you are interested in any of those shows. So what are you doing before, during, and after? And then finally, making sure that you have localized content. One of the things that we found in our research is that search engines, for example, if you search for something here versus in the US versus in the UK versus in the non-English market, it basically is tuned. Typically, Google thing is making a bit of a up and coming because of AI gives them a chance to maybe reassert themselves in the market. But they're connecting to local content, local providers. So you need to be localized there with your own registered domain. You need to have translated web pages, whatever content you're doing digitally, to have that translated. And the more of that you do, your translation of your keywords, translation of your hashtags, the more of that you do, the more localized you'll be and more likely to show up in search engine results. And that's part of that branding, casting the net over the market. So that's it. I think we're right on time, which I'm really happy about. I've done a ton of talking, but there's my contact information. I've given you a couple areas where you might want to drop me a line, and certainly invite you to attend that First Steps Next meeting if that's what you require. So thank you very much, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, Stephen, thank you so much. That was some really great instruction and information on the systems that lead to a successful export business. There's so many moving parts when you look to expand your business beyond Canadian borders. So I really appreciate your knowledge. This masterclass will be a phenomenal resource to refer to when we're taking the leap to export for some entrepreneurs. Unfortunately, we are short on time, but for those with questions, please do connect with our venture growth team or Stephen directly, and we'd be happy to continue that conversation. That continues today's masterclass. Again, huge thank you, Stephen, for leading this on everything export, a topic that's often on the minds of our clients and one that, when done right, can be a catapult to success on a grand scale. On behalf of Tech Alliance, thank you for joining us. Be sure to check out all of our upcoming events at techalliance.ca, including our event for International Women's Day, Smashing Barriers, on March 8th, featuring co-founder and CEO of Willful, Aaron Burry, at Museum London. Stay safe, be well, and take good care of yourself and each other. Thank you.
Thank you.